the morning program for NIFA Listens, Investing in Science to Transform Lives. First up, we'll have Ryan McEnany from Bailey Nurseries, and he has a presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak. My name is Ryan McEnany, and I am here this morning on behalf of a couple organizations, Bailey Nurseries, which is a company of which I am a fifth-generation owner, as well as the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. So just some very brief background. The National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture, as Mary alluded to earlier, is sort of a consortium of a bunch of different silos of the horticulture industry, from educators to researchers, public gardens, breeders and growers like we are at Bailey Nurseries, to master gardeners and sort of everyone in between. And the goal is to have a unified voice so that we can educate consumers and work on other different levels of government and public policy on the benefits of gardening, getting more people invested and excited about and participating in what is gardening, as well as increase the value and funding for what gardening is on a bunch of different spectrums. As of 2017, 70% of US households participated in some sort of gardening, whether that's actually digging in the dirt outside or working with vegetables. And the goal of the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture is to get that to 90% by 2025. Just some very brief background on Bailey and who we are. We are a wholesale grower of trees and shrubs. As I mentioned, we are a fifth-generation family-owned business. It's me and my mom. She is the president of the company, Terry McEnany. Many of you may know us from the university. We have a long-standing partnership with the University of Minnesota from our last 113 years of business. For the general consumer, they probably know not us, but our brands. In addition to being a wholesale grower, we own 3 of the largest plant brands in the world, one of which is Endless Summer. So if you see a blue pot in a garden center, that is from us. We introduced that plant in 2004, and it still remains the best-selling collection of hydrangeas in the world. We just surpassed 30 million sold last year. So I'm here sort of representing the bottom part of the funnel and how we communicate with the end consumer and how all the research then affects what we do as we work with that consumer. So very briefly, just some data on what the benefits of consumer horticulture is. This is from the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. They've done research already through their multiple different venues. All this data is available on consumerhort.org. But very briefly, consumer horticulture employs 2 million people a year and has almost $200 billion in economic value. So it's a really, really big and impactful organization. Another thing that's really important to realize with this is the opportunity for revenue impact for municipalities and for nonprofits. One example that NICH has put together is the revenue generation, for example, in Philadelphia. Their parks in 1 year generated $23 million in city revenue. One of the other things that this organization really works to do is educating the public on what the impact of plants and trees do for their communities. That those same Philadelphia parks reduced the heating and cooling by 8 to 12%. With just one 25-foot tree. So these are just some small examples of all the work that this organization is doing to showcase the impact of what consumer horticulture is. So there's 2 very brief things that I'm going to talk to you about today and how funding can help this organization and help our industry as a whole. One is through research partnerships. Especially for a company like ours, where we are, again, on that sort of that bottom part of that funnel, we don't do a lot of the research ourselves. We rely on partnerships. American Public Gardens Association is one of the major parts of the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. Casey Sklar, who's the president, is on the board of the organization, and they are one of the premier research partners for us. They do everything from plant protection to sustainability, and then again, I'll talk about in a moment with education. Some of the other organizations that we work with, American Hort, which is our National Horticultural Association, has a wing called the Horticulture Research Institute that again works across all disciplines. Organizations like the U.S. National Arboretum and the Minnesota Arboretum as well are great partners for those of us in the growing and breeding side of the business. And then one other sort of different piece of research that I think is interesting, there's an organization called the Home Garden Panel, and they're not doing the research like many of you are. They're working on consumer research and how a consumer engages with our product. And so they are really good at collecting data to help us communicate with the end consumer or with younger people growing up that are looking to potentially get into our industry and help us to communicate with them. I'm going to talk, there's a list here of some specific things that our partnership organizations are working on, but there's one specific thing that I want to talk about that we have already done that's just a great example of what this funding can do, and that is with Dutch elm disease. The University of Minnesota has been a leader in that. Mark Stennis was a great partner of Bailey Nurseries as well, in his working with what is now called the St. Croix elm. Again, we had this long-standing history with the University of Minnesota, and so when this plant was brought in, research was done because it was showing resistance to Dutch elm. There was a lot of time spent at the university to determine that it was truly resistant, and then that plant was then given to Bailey Nurseries, which we then introduced for distribution all around the United States so that we can have a really strong American elm back in our landscapes. So that, along with other breeding efforts, we have a breeding company. I don't know if you know Dr. Michael Durr from the University of Georgia. We bought his breeding company 3 years ago, and so we do a lot of in-house breeding work. And so we rely on partners with the US, especially with the USDA, to make sure that we can introduce the best new plants that also have that pathogen resistance. The final piece that I want to talk to you about today is the consumer education and consumer marketing and how important that is so that we can not only engage the homeowner with everything that we do, but also educate and get people excited about coming into this industry. The American Public Gardens Association represents all of the public gardens in the United States. One thing that's really interesting and exciting to me is that they work with over 2 million people on really specific targeted education programs per year. And that's everyone from elementary age kids all the way through senior citizens. And so it's a really important piece to have funding to help support those programs. And again, that's just through the American Public Gardens Association. There's other Master Gardener extension programs and so many others that have a really dramatic effect. And along with that, there's other consumer direct marketing, getting them just to get their hands dirty and dig in the dirt. And it's so important that they do that in an informed manner. And that is where the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture comes into play, where they can pull all parts of our industry together so that we can have that unified voice to get people excited. Because a more educated public leads to a more engaged public, which leads to more sustainable practices, a stronger industry, more jobs, and getting more people excited. And that's the last thing that I want to leave you with the importance of marketing what our industry does, is being able to get people excited about working, because we all talk about how labor is so tight. So with these STEM programs and finding other ways to show the diversity of what our industry offers, from research all the way through something like my role, which we sort of created. I am the spokesperson for 3 consumer plant brands, and I get to travel the country and talk about gardening with people. And that's not something that people really know about. So being able to market this wide diversity of what our industry does is so incredibly important, and we need support in being able to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. Next, we have Neil Anderson from the University of Minnesota.
Good morning. My name is Neil Anderson. I grew up on a dairy farm in the state of Vermont and became involved in horticulture and plant breeding when I was 5 years old. I'm here to talk today about the importance of plant breeding. I think this emphasizes Ryan's testimony that he just gave about the importance of products and plant breeding. Currently, I'm a professor in the Department of Horticultural Science at the University of Minnesota on the St. Paul campus. I specialize in floriculture, specifically flower breeding and genetics. Our department has 8 plant breeders working on a diversity of horticultural crops, from flowers, trees and shrubs, turf grass, ornamental grasses, tomatoes, potatoes, grapes and wine to apples. Likewise, our sister Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics at the university hosts 10 public sector breeding programs, which means that as many as 18 public sector breeding programs are here at the University of Minnesota. This is an important contribution to the future of agriculture throughout the country. According to a recent survey by the Minnesota Nursery and Landscape Association, horticulture is a significant contributor to the Minnesota economy with an estimated value of $3.2 billion at the retail level. The Minnesota horticultural industry is supported by various organizations such as the Minnesota Nursery and Landscape Association, the Apple Growers of Minnesota, the Midwest Fruit and Vegetable Growers, the Minnesota Turf and Grounds Foundation, the Minnesota State Horticultural Society, and many, many others. These organizations partner with plant breeders and physiologists to create, test, produce, and market products that are superior for Minnesota growers and consumers countrywide and worldwide. I am the PI of a current USDA NIFA ELI grant on innovative hands of undergraduate entrepreneurs in urban agriculture. NIFA is really a very important sponsor of increasing our engagement with minority students into modern day agriculture, particularly in urban settings. And the Twin Cities here of Minnesota have a very large urban population, and urban farming is a new field that we are venturing into. We need to have this type of funding continued by NIFA. Several faculty in my department also have specialty research initiatives or SCREE grants. I applaud these NIFA granting efforts, but much more is needed. Specializing in a field where the majority of crops are grown as ornamentals for their intrinsic beauty and horticultural therapeutic benefits, federal and other funding sources are more difficult to obtain since the majority of floricultural crops are non-edible crops. My program has integrated production education with ornamental edible crops using hydroponic or aquaponic production methods suitable in urban agriculture production settings. Most of the plant breeding programs in my department, including my own, work with perennial crops, which provides numerous benefits to society. Several programs are also involved in the Forever Green initiative, as was testified about earlier. NIFA grants provide valuable resources for my department and our programs to enhance the mission of educating students, particularly minorities, and conducting research in the promotion of urban agriculture and novel production methodologies. However, much more needs to be done. We look to NIFA to increase their support of the specialty crops of horticulture. It is my opinion that the greatest challenge facing us in this century is long-term, sustainable, low-carbon input urban production of annual, biennial, and perennial herbaceous and woody crops in controlled environments and the field. And controlled environments include greenhouses, warehouses, high tunnels, and low tunnels. As a plant breeder, my program and crops are continuously faced with the annual climate changes that impact important factors such as winter survival here in Minnesota, cold hardiness along with the corollary acclimation and deacclimation rates, as well as heat and drought stress tolerance, both outside and in controlled environments. We have found that plants that are reliably hardy in USDA Zone 3-4 are sometimes killed outright by warmer, open winters that lack snow. It's important to work with plant breeders and conduct research on creating crops that can be resilient to the changing climatic conditions. The question remains as to how we can achieve the changes needed for modern day agriculture. The answer lies with continued funding of plant breeding and genetics in order to make genetic grain. In my discipline of horticultural science, specifically ornamental plant breeding, few, if any, funding opportunities are available to transform new or existing crops. This is particularly problematic as new methods of producing plants, particularly for urban farms, such as rooftop gardens, hydroponics, and aquaponics, do not have crops to use that are bred and selected and adapted to these production environments. Already in our research with aquaponic production of fish and plants in greenhouses and warehouses in Minnesota and the Midwest, we have discovered that using crops adapted for field production into aquaponics is fraught with difficulties. We have found that day-neutral strawberry cultivars bred for field and high tunnel production were susceptible to spider mites in both greenhouse and warehouses, which devastated the entire crop, creating yields significantly lower than in the fields. Plant breeders can solve this and many other problems. On a separate front, having plant breeders actively select against invasive potential in crops during the breeding and domestication process is another important need that can be realized to continue the continued evolution of important crops that are not invasive. I propose that NIFA devote future funding opportunities for plant breeding programs devoted to specialty crops within horticulture. And this can be done in coordination with many of the national organizations that exist in the promotion of plant breeding, such as the National Association of Plant Breeding and the multi-state research project SCC 80, Sustaining the Future of Plant Breeding. While I do not believe it is a wise idea for Congress to move NIFA out of the District of Columbia, were this proposal to be realized, I think the Twin Cities area of St. Paul and Minneapolis would be a perfect place to be the new home for USDA NIFA. Given our large urban and suburban populations of diverse cultures and being the Midwestern hub for science, innovation, technology, and education. If this move occurs, I strongly support the potential relocation of NIFA offices to Minnesota and the Twin Cities, in particular the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota, where our agricultural research is centered. It would be the perfect location for NIFA. I applaud the efforts of NIFA in hosting these countrywide listening sessions and support enhanced NIFA funding to supply long-term production of ornamental and food crops. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dale Gallenberg from University of Wisconsin, River Falls.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dale Gallenberg. I'm the Dean of the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environmental Sciences at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. I'm here today representing UW River Falls, but also speaking on behalf of other non-land grant universities and campuses in the University of Wisconsin system, including UW Platteville, UW Stevens Point, and UW Stout. We appreciate NIFA's efforts to obtain input from stakeholders so we can all advance our shared mission of teaching, research, and extension. Today I'll try to address some of the challenges the agriculture industry is facing and what our top priorities are for addressing those challenges. In Wisconsin, 1 out of every 12 jobs is related to agriculture, and the industry annually contributes nearly $90 billion to our economy. One of the keys to supporting the agriculture industry's workforce and in discovering new innovations to further grow this major industry is the university system. While Wisconsin is home to UW-Madison, one of the nation's premier R1 research and land-grant universities, the non-land grant universities are also necessary to fully realize NIFA's mission of supporting research, education, and extension in food and agriculture in not just Wisconsin, but across the U.S. As an example, one sector of the agriculture industry that we specifically support at UW River Falls is the dairy industry. UW River Falls Dairy Science Program is one of the largest undergraduate dairy science programs in the country with approximately 140 students. Teaching is our principal mission, and with 2 laboratory farms, one of which houses our Dairy Learning Center, we play a critical role in providing hands-on experiences to students to better prepare them for a variety of roles and careers in the dairy industry. One of the greatest challenges currently facing the dairy industry in Wisconsin is oversupply for current available outlets, and as a result, falling prices of milk. The new trade deal with Canada will help provide increased opportunities for Wisconsin dairy producers in the Canadian milk market, but there is still a long-term and complex problem that needs to be addressed and solved. In June of 2017, the UW system, the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, and the dairy industry stakeholders engaged with one another in a dairy summit to identify the challenges and opportunities facing the industry. Following this summit, the UW system, DATCAP, and the dairy industry formed a Wisconsin Dairy Task Force 2.0 that is in the process of developing concrete recommendations in areas like workforce development, research and innovation, and pricing and market volatility. The UW system has been and will continue to be a key player in these discussions moving forward. As one of the non-land grant universities in the UW system, we are part of that group being called upon to help the state's dairy industry and indeed the broad agriculture industry of Wisconsin as a whole maintain a skilled workforce as well as discover new innovations to advance the industry. The funding NIFA provides to non-land grant universities to help serve the industries in Wisconsin and other states is critical. However, to date, no funding appropriation for NIFA's non-land grant colleges of agriculture, or NLGCA's, capacity building grants program has been proposed as a line item in the president's budget. Rather, appropriations have come through annual spending bills enacted by the U.S. Congress. The federal government has for many years funded capacity building grants to the 1862, 1890, and 1994 land grant institutions, recognizing their important contributions to education, research, and extension in agriculture. However, non-land grant institutions such as ours are enrolling an ever-increasing share of undergraduate students in agriculture, food systems, and renewable resources. In part, this helps fill the pipeline of students to graduate schools and industry that furthers the research mission addressed in many of the previous presentations today. Additionally, though, the non-land grants are making significant direct contributions to basic and applied research and to extension and outreach. It was only recently that the 2008 Farm Bill and subsequent Farm Bills authorized a capacity building grant program for the non-land grants. These capacity building grants allow our universities to further provide necessary opportunities for our students to gain hands-on learning experiences and their ability to conduct research. For example, a capacity building grant awarded to UW-Platteville gave students the ability to conduct applied research on grazing-based dairy production systems. At UW River Falls, a capacity building grant focused in part on development of a simulation model for students to use in studying capital investment decisions on Wisconsin dairy farms. These grants and others at UW River Falls, UW-Platteville, and other non-land grant institutions around the U.S. represent targeted investments resulting in significant impact for NIFA and its mission of teaching, research, and extension. As capacity grants, they also allow the non-land grant colleges of agriculture to be more competitive in other grant funding programs sponsored by USDA NIFA and other federal agencies. We respectfully ask NIFA to ensure that support of programs and opportunities in agriculture and renewable resources at non-land grant universities is a national priority and receives a stable funding source through a line item appropriation. On behalf of the University of Wisconsin-River Falls, UW system, and the non-land grant agriculture institutions and community nationwide, thank you for this opportunity to comment. We look forward to working with you to enhance NIFA's success. Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 more names on our confirmed list, but I know they may be arriving late. Is Aaron Meyer here? Okay, and how about Greg Cuomo? Wonderful, thank you, from the University of Minnesota.
I appreciate the opportunity to provide NIFA with input on research priorities in food, agricultural, and natural resources. My name is Greg Cuomo, and I serve as the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Programs in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences at the University of Minnesota, and as Deputy Director of the Minnesota Agricultural Experiment Station. Today, I'll be sharing perspectives on both the current efforts and future focus of the University of Minnesota and the nationwide network of state and agricultural experiment stations. As you likely understand, the agricultural experiment stations are the research arm of the land-grant universities. As part of the land-grant system, the University of Minnesota contributes to the comprehensive network of institutions whose mission is to serve society, provide access to high-quality education, train tomorrow's leaders, and do research to address the grand challenges of providing safe and abundant food for all and enhancing our environment. The land-grant system is strongly linked in our commitment to these principles. I share this background as context for my reflections and the requests that I'll make. Today, many have articulated key needs and the importance of their work to society, and I want to thank them for their efforts. I'm going to step back and talk more generally about the work and the need for support for the larger mission. First, let me turn to my role at the University of Minnesota. The College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, or CFANS, lives out the land-grant legacy through its mission, inspiring minds, nourishing people, and enhancing the natural environment. CFANS is driven by putting students first and educating the leaders of tomorrow, by creating science-based solutions, by growing our economy, and by extending our impact and reach globally. The importance of the land-grant mission is within the title of our college, the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences. We often ask audiences, what's the most important word in that title? Then food, agriculture, natural resources, sciences, and depending on where we are, we get different answers. But the most important word in our college's name is and. We must produce food to feed a growing world population and enhance our environment. These are not choices, they are imperatives. And we are indeed tackling society's grand challenges. This is made possible through our important relationships with NIFA. As we continue to prioritize our research focus, we envision a world that includes lakes free of invasive species, disease-resistant crops, products that protect and promote the health of our friends and family, and we do this by turning to science to find solutions that drive a sustainable future. Our focus at the University of Minnesota is around a number of key research platforms, including big data and insight, climate adaptation, microbiomes and their relationship ranging from soil health to human health, novel crop development, water resources issues, and the connections between animal health, human health, and nutrition. That said, let me briefly highlight a few efforts: big data and insight, novel crop development, and the research platforms that use emerging technologies to enable interdisciplinary approaches to addressing key issues. We think it's critically important to further our research in the data and insight space. Our primary effort, the Genetics by Environment, by Management, by Socioeconomic, or GEMS platform, turns big data across multiple information and input streams into actionable information. This approach to data enables a better decision-making tools, improving precision management systems to optimize productivity, resulting in more food with less inputs. Additionally, as you've already heard today, we are focusing our work on novel crop development. We are researching new ways of developing crops for agricultural production that strengthen economies while protecting water and other natural resources. For example, kernza and field pennycress are true value-added crops that protect the soil and are now moving towards commercialization. Lastly, at the University of Minnesota, we connect disciplines like plant breeding, big data, and computational biology to address food production, human health, and nutritional needs. This comprehensive and integrated approach highlights how the University of Minnesota and land-grant universities have adapted to addressing evolving research needs. With that, let me turn to a more national focus. First, and I know you've already heard this, we firmly believe that relocating NIFA away from the capital region will have profoundly negative effects on NIFA and land-grant university partnerships. While it may be easy to schedule meetings over the web, relationships are not so simple, particularly as partnering with agencies like the National Science Foundation and the National Institute for Health drive the interdisciplinary approaches needed to address the challenges that face society today and into the future. Now I am going to return to the work of the land-grant universities. We plainly need to produce more with less. We need to reduce inputs, that's water, fertilizer, pesticides, fuels, and energy across all production sectors. And this must be done in a sustainable way. In this room, we all understand that. To do more with less will require full participation in NIFA's land-grant partners, research, educators, and extension specialists. We support NIFA in providing innovative opportunities that seek an integrated approach to sustainable and resilient food systems. So what are our top priorities? Strong support of public agricultural research and development enterprise. The support that's needed breaks down into three priority areas: capacity funding, the Agricultural Food and Research Initiative, or AFRI, and infrastructure. Of these three, infrastructure poses the largest challenge, yet offers many opportunities for innovative state and federal partnerships. Capacity funds are critical because of the flexibility they provide. They represent the partnership with the federal government that provides core equity investments, enabling land-grant institutions to be responsive to both short-term challenges when they arise and to take a long-term perspective to prepare for an unknowable future. It is the land-grant system that looks to the future, takes the risks, and does the research to prepare for threats to production, human nutritional needs, and the environment. And the land-grant system uniquely fills that role. AFRI, NIFA's competitive grant initiative, funded in FY18 at $400 million, is authorized at $700 million. We appreciate that NIFA does not have control over appropriations. Conversely, we are confident that NIFA is supportive of AFRI funded at its fully authorized level, and we recommend that NIFA consistently strives to secure the authorized funding during internal budget negotiations while strategically maintaining capacity funds. Let me close by saying we recognize that NIFA is a critical and key partner to realizing our land-grant mission. We value that partnership. Working together, the land-grant system and NIFA are well positioned to meet food, nutritional, and environmental imperatives facing society today and into the future. We very much appreciate the time and opportunity today to outline our priorities to reach that full potential of the land-grant mission. And thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we'll have Bev Durgan from the University of Minnesota.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. My name is Bev Durgan. I am Dean of University of Minnesota Extension, and I'm here today representing University of Minnesota, but also ECOP, which is the Extension Committee on Policy, which is the national organization that represents Extension on the Board of Agricultural Assembly within APLU, so a lot of acronyms. But again, ECOP sets the priorities for Extension across the nation when we look at partnering with Extension with the rest of the land-grant mission. want to thank NIFA for being here today and for coming to University of Minnesota and Minnesota to talk about the priorities that NIFA will have going into the next year and really into the next Farm Bill session that all of us, I think, are very interested in and where that process is going. Extension is a major and a significant partner with NIFA. NIFA provides funding for extension programs throughout the U.S., and extension is one of the ways that we connect research and NIFA's mission to the stakeholders throughout the nation. Extension brings science-based information to citizens across the state and throughout the Midwest and the nation. One of the things I'd like to talk about today, and several other people did, is about capacity funds. Capacity funds are very important to extension here in Minnesota, but also in the nation. In fact, capacity funds provide about 15% of our funding here at University of Minnesota, and this funding is used to help support the salaries and the programs of our extension faculty and our educators throughout the state. If it wasn't for capacity funds, we would not be able to have the faculty that we have to really apply for some of the NIFA competitive funds. And as Dr. Kent Olson just mentioned earlier today, one of those large NIFA AFRI grants was to be working with communities, for communities to make sure that they are a welcoming place for newcomers, whether they're newcomers from the urban area or our new immigrants. We also recently received a large AFRI grant to work with rural grocery stores. And as Kent mentioned, but many other mentioned, is that communities are very important to agriculture and our farmers, and that when communities lose their rural grocery stores, not only do they lose a sense of community, but they also lose an important market for our local growers. And so we have a grant where we're looking with rural grocery stores, helping them to connect with local farmers, and helping them then to open up new markets and new opportunities to local agriculture. Some of the questions that were asked today about what are some of the needed breakthroughs in science technologies that you would like to see NIFA invest in. One of those is multidisciplinary research and extension. And as we heard throughout today is that some of the big issues facing agriculture in our communities cannot be solved just by one discipline. So working across those disciplines and making sure that we have these large multidisciplinary teams to tackle some of these big problems. Also, what was mentioned today is that we really need to keep the funding we have and increase the funding at land-grant universities to support the mission of extension, research, and education. This is especially true when we look at where our workforce is going to be in the future for agriculture, but also in rural communities. We are in extension, not only in Minnesota, but also throughout the U.S., have a substantial investment in 4-H. And for those of you that are not familiar with 4-H, you may not know that 4-H is the largest youth serving organization in the nation. And in Minnesota, we have over 65,000 youth involved in our 4-H programs, which is an important way that we look at our workforce, but also our workforce in agriculture and some of our STEM disciplines. If I talk about some of the priorities of extension here in Minnesota, but also nationwide, I'd like to list a few of what our priorities are and what we'll be focusing on in the next year. They include nutrition, health and wellness, 4-H and our positive youth development, water quality, food production and food security, community and economic development. And again, I would like to stress that agriculture production, and natural resources are an important part of what extension focuses on, not only here in Minnesota, but also throughout the nation. But we also have to make sure that we are also looking at those communities where those farmers are living, the families that those farmers are part of, and that whole part of having good functioning communities, rural communities, so that we can continue to support our agricultural production and natural resources. With that, I would like to again thank NIFA for being here today. And also on behalf of ECOP, I'd like to again echo some of the other comments that we've heard today about NIFA moving out of the Washington, D.C. area. ECOP feels that this would be a mistake. It again will prevent some of the good interactions that we have with other agencies, and that we again strongly ask NIFA to reconsider and USDA to reconsider moving NIFA from Washington, D.C. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Greg Schwesser. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Greg Schwesser. I work with Extension at the University of Minnesota in a unique program called the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships. The Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships work within our 5 regions in greater Minnesota, and we are the ear to the ground of the people, of the farmers and the community members out there. And what our unique niche and our role is we take those innovative ideas and concepts that people are working on in agriculture, and we bring them to the university and help solve those problems within reach by connecting university expertise and resources to issues that were identified and brought to us from the community members. So I just want to speak very briefly today about some of the things that are coming up that I hear from having my thumb on the ground in the communities out there, and in particular in the area of local and regional food systems. So local and regional food systems have been growing steadily over the past 10, 15 years now. It's no longer a niche thing. It's something that happens everywhere, all over the place. But that has presented itself some unique challenges as well. And some of the things that people are looking to address these challenges are, I've got about 3 of them here I want to talk about. One of them is it's time to start graduating above the level of CSAs and farmers markets. In Minnesota and in many communities in the upper Midwest, we still are in this pattern where farmers are bringing their stuff to CSAs and farmers markets to make those direct market sales. Well, a lot of those have started to become saturated, and farmers are now very skilled at growing a lot of things, and we need to start figuring out how to create new markets for these crops. So one of the ways that we are addressing that and working on that in Minnesota is by trying to use the existing infrastructure that we have rather than create a new infrastructure. We're trying to figure out how to use those grocery stores, those warehouses, those roads, those grain elevators, all those things that we already have, how to incorporate those local food systems into those existing infrastructure to serve our rural communities, our farmers, and our urban dwellers too. Another thing that we've been working on a lot is year-round production and year-round crop storage. So a lot of farmers are really struggling, whether you're a local food farmer with 5, 10 acres, or whether you're a large commodity crop farmer. Everybody's sort of struggling right now, and one of the things that we can do to create a more viable farming system is by looking at ways that we can grow crops year-round with energy-efficient infrastructure through greenhouses, high tunnels, hoop houses in high tunnels, passive solar greenhouses, any number of things. There's a lot of things out there, but a lot of these are in their infant stage. So there's nothing that's very large scale right now that's an energy efficient solution, but there are a lot of things out there that people are trying to figure out. Another one is crop storage. So in Minnesota, for example, we have a unique environment where with our cold winters and our ability to grow a lot of diverse crops like squash and carrots, we have the ability to be a unique center for carrot production, for example. There are other things, but we don't have these large crop storage systems where we could have thousands and thousands of acres of carrots, for example. So there are people interested in those types of things and figuring out how we can create a more vibrant, diverse agricultural economy, a horticultural agricultural economy beyond that small scale level. And that takes a large understanding of the economics of the scale, both on the farm scale side. How do you scale up, and what kinds of equipment, machinery do you need, but not be too big? What's the right size equipment and scale? And also on the scale side, on the economic side. So how do we make this work from a more macro level? Another large issue that is facing almost all of our farmers is climate change, and we need to look at climate resilience and climate adaptation. And so when I think of resiliency, I think both on the national scale and the local scale. So in the Southwest, when we have multi-year round droughts, that impacts our food access in the Midwest. And then a year later, when you have 1 year of flood, that dramatically impacts our food access in the Midwest with crop increases and price increases. So being able to offset some of that and create at the same time more vibrant, diverse farm economies is something that's important. And adaptation, in Minnesota, we have, and especially in the southeast region, we have instances where there are consistent hard storms, large flooding and large storm events and flooding events that are yearly and consistently starting to drown out our farmers. We also have bizarre instances where the snow melts in December and then freezes, and then we have crop fields that are covered in ice, and any cover crops that were put into those fields no longer will grow. And so that's sort of changing weirdness that needs to be addressed if we're going to continue to have a viable, functional, diverse agricultural system. Finally, one more thing I want to say. This isn't exactly about production or food, but healthcare. Our farmers need access to affordable healthcare, and they need it in order to continue to be able to farm. And without it, it leaves everybody viable to losing farm to debt and to crisis. So with that, I'll step aside and go to the next. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have David Marks from the University of Minnesota.
How does this thing work? Oh. Let me get back to wasting all my time here.
So it's just the right and the left. Uh-oh, we're losing our battery. We might be losing our battery on this one.
I'm a magnet for this kind of thing, so it happens all the time.
Yeah, maybe it did.
So it should be right arrow, right arrow forward, left.
So take me back.
If nothing else, aim it towards the back of the room, and it'll work better.
One
There's
more.
the battery.
Can I just say next slide too if I need to?
Yeah, yeah, I can advance it for you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the delay there. I'm going to do something a little bit different. And one thing I want to do is kind of give you a story that I think will be considered a success story for NIFA. And I'm David Marks, a professor in plant biology. And I'm a basic research scientist, spent most of my career working on the model plant Arabidopsis, all by myself in the lab with a few postdocs and students and such. And so my research is, of the last few years has taken a different course. And I want to tell you about that. And as I said, I'm hoping it will be considered a success story as the research that I'm going to talk about has been funded by NIFA, largely through the joint USDA-DOE program. Okay. And so we've already seen this story here from Mitch Hunter a little bit ago. And this is this business of sustainability of our current farming systems is threatened by the fact that during much of the year, the soil is left barren, which results in nutrient leaching and soil erosion. And I would also just venture to say that this also represents an opportunity in that this is land that's not currently in production. If it was in production, could help feed that growing population. Okay, and we've seen this slide here too, just emphasizing that this nutrient runoff has severe ecological problems, causing dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, more close to home, algal blooms in our lakes and streams. And also, very important right here in Minnesota, it's also a big problem that the well water in many of the rural communities is being contaminated with nitrates. And that each of those red dots represents a well that's over the acceptable limit. So what can we do about this? This is something that has concerned Don Weiss, who put together the Forever Green initiative that we've already heard about to try to address this problem. And one of the things that Don has done is he's identified a potential cover crop that will help this situation, and that is pennycress. And what pennycress can do, it can grow as a cover during that barren period and take up the excess nitrogen as shown here, just as well as a crop such as winter rye, which is a traditional cover crop. The advantage of pennycress is that it's going to give us an economic return on a harvestable oil seed. So where does pennycress come from? Well, Don drove up and down around the country looking for pennycress in ditches here and there. And this is just a sample location. But the cool thing about pennycress is that right out of the ditch, it can produce a couple thousand pounds per acre of an oil seed that, as it is in the wild, can't be used as an edible food, but it can be used for biofuels. And so pennycress has some really nice attributes already, just as a wild weed. It can be harvested with conventional equipment. So how do we envision pennycress to be put into the field? Something like this, where it's going to be grown in planted in standing corn or shortly thereafter harvest, allowed to overwinter to provide its ecological benefits, ecosystem services to take up that nitrogen, get it off the field with a harvestable oil seed in time to put out beans. So the idea is to make this whole new cropping system without disrupting the current farming system. So pennycress, right out of the ditch, is still a weed, has a lot of weedy characters. The plant should mature a little bit early so we can get it into that interval. The seed pods shatter like a weed. The seeds are not edible, and so on. And what my research has been is to address those problems. And very quickly, we've been able to, in just a few years, find the crucial domestication traits that will allow pennycress to take its place as a potential major crop species. One, to fit into that interval, we identified lines that flower early and mature early that will allow that farmer to get the beans on the field timely. Okay, we also have shatter as an issue, and we've been able to identify lines that show reduced shatter, just shown here. We've been able to find plants that no longer have that glucosinolate. Pennycress is known as stinkweed, and here we have a variety that no longer has that. We've also been able to create a variety that no longer has the toxic oil. We've been able to create a variety that has a canola-like oil. And all this has been done largely because we've been able to quickly do this because of research that was done on the model plant Arabidopsis. And what I would maintain, and that is that Arabidopsis has provided a road map for how to proceed with pennycress. Because all those traits I just talked about, we already know everything about those from research on Arabidopsis. And so for instance, here is just a comparison of Arabidopsis and pennycress, very closely related. With all the years and years of work in pennycress or Arabidopsis to describe flowering in Arabidopsis, knowing the gene space in pennycress, we now know everything about flowering in pennycress. And so my feeling is simply that more basic research would greatly benefit all plant biology, especially breeding. This is a bigger team put together by Don Weiss. That's not just me, but agronomists, industrial partners, all working together to do this. And I would again argue that basic science is the key to what has drove this research, in that we know that the causative mutations that are for all those different traits. And I would argue that basic research should be a required part of many aspects of NIFA-funded research, including the flagship CAP program. With that, I'm done.
Great. Thank you. Next up, we have Julie Weisenhorn.
Thank you, NIFA, for being here for the listening sessions. This is my first listening sessions, so I'm pretty excited to be here. And I am an extension educator in horticulture with the University of Minnesota. I'm also a past chair of the Environmental Committee for the National Institute of Consumer Horticulture, which my colleague Ryan spoke so eloquently about. And I wanted to give a little bit of information about niche, and that its main goal is to increase gardening in the United States so that 95% of citizens are gardening by the year 2025. Now, Ryan mentioned that 70% of people have been listed as doing some kind of gardening, and that's a great number, but we want to get it up to another 25% to 95%. That's a big goal and not very far off. So we are eager to partner and continue to partner with NIFA, as well as our partners in nonprofits and academics, universities, extension, et cetera. So I didn't come into horticulture as a kid. I didn't care for gardening when I was a child, and kind of my first crop that I harvested was a rotten potato, which really put a indelible memory in my head. I got into it because I became a first-time homeowner and bought a house in South Minneapolis with my husband back in 1989. I knew nothing about yard work. My dad and mom had often done the yard work at our house. My brother mowed the lawn. I really didn't have to do anything. But one of the things that I did do as a child and growing up was I enjoyed the landscape we had in our house in Rochester. Rochester, Minnesota is located south of the Twin Cities. And it was, the house that we lived in was built by my grandfather and had a fantastic landscape, which I now appreciate much more than I did back then. One of the things that I was allowed to do in that landscape is pick whatever I wanted, play whatever climb trees, dig in the dirt, do whatever I wanted to do. I didn't really see it as gardening or landscaping or horticulture or anything. But it instilled in me a memory growing up. And I think that openness that my parents gave us was really important in setting the stage for future science and inquisitive minds and curiosity. When we bought our first house, I'd had some small successes with houseplants. I was pretty good at it. I could grow a ficus tree and I could grow a Hoya plant. And it was that little tiny bit of success that made me pretty confident that I would be able to grow something in my backyard. And we had a small urban backyard. It was right on a very busy street, had an alley in the back. And so not prime real estate or horticulture location, but I had some success. And I think that's part of our role at NIFA, as well as Extension, and in horticulture and at Niche, and all of these different groups in our consortium, is to help people have success. The problem is there's a population out there that we don't reach in Extension. And I'll speak personally about that. There's a group of people, there's a population, some audiences that know nothing about Extension. I am an example. I didn't know anything about Extension growing up. And I think that that's the biggest challenge for NIFA and for those of us involved, is to reach those populations and audiences. They're people like I was, a first-time homeowner. I've bought a house, I've got a mortgage, I've got a yard and a landscape, and I don't know anything about caring for it. How can we reach those people? How can we reach the people who have now immigrated into Minnesota but are not familiar with our growing capabilities and our culture and the fact that you can't grow things year-round here? How do we reach these people? So I think that's the biggest challenge. What I'd like to see is that we have a priority within NIFA to generate and create technology that's innovative, that helps all of us, that anybody can use to reach those audiences. So the nonprofits, the public gardens, consortiums like Niche, Extension, universities, industry, our partners, that we would have that technology at our fingertips so that we could reach those people. I don't know what it is. I'm not here to give an answer to that, but I'd like to see dedication from NIFA in the form of funding and support of entities like Niche and Extension and the nonprofits and the industry to support some kind of technology that helps us to reach those audiences about horticulture. With that, thank you again for being here. Glad you came on a nice day and it wasn't snowing. And I look forward to working more with you in the future. Thank you.
All right. Is Nancy Elise here? I might have that last name wrong. Anyone else in the room like to provide comment before we wrap up today? All right, then. I'd like to introduce Dr. Randy Johnson. She is going to provide a wrap-up, a synthesis of what we heard. And in addition, we will be posting the video, the transcripts, and eventually a report of what we heard in 2018 on the NIFA Listens website. So you should be able to find that pretty easily with a quick Google search or going to www.nifa.usda.gov/NIFA Listens.
Well, first off, I want to thank you all for being here. You took time out of your day, sometimes more than one day, for coming here. And I know, it was a stretch for some of you. It's important we hear what you have to say. We're in Washington, D.C. for a while, and I know you want us here if we're not there from what I heard. Okay, see, I did summarize some things. But you all are important for getting us information that comes from the ground up. I mean, we're out there, but you are out there much more, so we appreciate what you've said to us. And I'm going to summarize my 9 pages of notes, which I've had no time to go over and summarize other than going, oops. And just for the record, volunteering to summarize the end of a day or a morning is not the wisest thing to do. But once again, thanks for being here. My notes. I heard a lot about a systems approach. To me, as I've listened to today's stuff, the definition of sustainable agriculture just came through to me. I mean, it's about production and profitability. It's about maintaining a healthy environment. And it's about people. And what I heard all day long, or all morning long, we're not past lunch yet, is the importance of all 3 of those aspects. And so we have to take a systems approach and look at the big picture, as well as looking at other things. Communities came up over and over again. I heard One Health. I heard the need to develop markets because we have things that we don't have the markets for, and we're developing new things so that we can keep a healthy pasture or field or forest where we're going to have markets for these new crops we're developing. And the need for extension and nonprofits as we deal with these communities as well. So that's something we're going to have to take back and better incorporate into our RFAs. Breeding came up quite often. Being a quantitative geneticist, something I could get into. The need for new crops, be them to keep those cover crops out there, your land covered. For a new situation, for example, if you are breeding indoors, you're doing high houses, we need something different. If we're doing organic agriculture, we need things designed for that. And in order to get there, I heard multiple things we need to do. We have the high-tech techniques, which we need to further develop so we can make progress there, but at the same time, we need the techniques that are appropriate for organic agriculture. So when it comes to breeding, there's plenty to do. Big data came up time and time again. It's out there. How do we assemble it? How do we use it? How do we answer the questions? Being the director of the Climate Change Division, it was good to hear climate change come up over and over again. How do we adapt? How do we put farming systems out there which can actually improve the environmental footprint of what we do, capture the carbon, these sorts of things. And along those lines, sustainable crops and the new crops that are going to enable us to increase the production we need for the growing population and at the same time reduce or improve. I don't know. Not only do we have to have a better environmental footprint, we've got to go from being negative to positive. And you know, the challenge is just getting neutral, so we have a long way to go there. Like I said, I've just scribbled all this stuff down. And I'm sure I'm going to miss some of what you all said, but I do have 9 pages of notes. We've recorded you, and somebody's going to transcribe this, so trust me, I'm sure I forgot plenty. Healthy communities, healthy environment, diversity. Diversity from the point of understanding our communities. They're becoming more diverse. How can we support that community so that those communities thrive, especially the rural communities, and at the same time, the diversity in our workforce. I mean, that's a challenge we've all had over the years. How do we increase that diversity? Number of people mentioned underfunding. I'm not surprised. I've done it more than once in my career. We heard about horticulture. We heard about animals. We heard about organic agriculture. So that came through. And then I've heard a lot about partnerships. So, you know, in my 5 minutes of looking at 10 pages of notes, this is what I've heard. Be assured we're listening even closer. I know there's a transcript of this. You'll all be able to see it. Like I said, appreciate you being here. And we will take your comments. We actually listened to them last year. Be aware that if we use them in an RFA, we can't tell you what we did with it, okay? That would be illegal. But we heard you last year. We're hearing you this year. So any other questions or comments before we close up here? Not that I can see anybody with a light in my eyes. Okay, on that note, thanks for coming. Stay in touch with us. You can find us online. You can contact me, Lori, Louie, Megan, or any of the other people we have there. You know most of our NPLs. They're on the webpage as well. So thanks so much, and we'll see you when you come visit us wherever we're going to be.